Thanks, Myra. So thanks everyone for hanging in there throughout the day. We heard a lot of great pitches from entrepreneurs and scientists. For the last part of the day, we wanted to kind of turn the tables and hear from the investors and give you all a chance to ask them questions and pick their brains. I'm going to introduce Chau. Chau was a partner at OrbiMed for 20 years before going independent under the banner of CJNV BioVentures. As an investor, in addition to that, he's currently the chair of OnCusp Therapeutics, and he's a strategic advisor to Blackbird and several other interesting life science initiatives. Welcome, Chau, and the panelists.
Thanks, Matt. Can you guys hear me? Good. Well, Myra, I think, really talked up the panel, so I hope we can live up to your expectations. We're very excited to be here today. A terrific group of investors representing a diverse range of experiences. I like to say venture capital is a team sport, and so is building a biotech ecosystem. And I think Matt and the team, you have done such a great job, and we're really pleased to be with you today. We would like to have an interactive discussion with you, so feel free to ask questions and keep it light. So my name is Chau, as Matt said. I've been an investor for a long time. Usually I answer questions, but today I get to ask them. So if you have questions, feel free to jump in and make them as provocative and challenging as you would like. The panel is ready for you. Let's get started. Today was an interesting day. I woke up about 4:30, flew in from Houston, Texas, and I was really happy to see that 89bio was acquired by Roche for up to $3.5 billion. Really exciting transaction. Last week we saw Tourmaline get acquired for their IL-6 antibody for about $1.5 billion. Earlier this year we saw a $10 billion acquisition of Verona, commercial stage company. So it does feel a little bit like there's life in the M&A market. Secondly, I think we just recently saw an IPO, LB Pharma did make it out, although they broke issue price, but they did raise money. So there's life potentially there. We haven't seen an IPO in a while. We're going to start off the discussion with Albert Hwang. He is the global head of biotech banking at Morgan Stanley. And Albert's going to tell us if the M&A trend is coming back, if it's on the upswing, and also when the IPO market's going to reopen. Albert,
Crystal ball.
October 17th, 2020. Thanks, Chau. And just to quickly introduce myself, as Chau said, I run the healthcare business at Morgan Stanley, but I spend all my time in biotech. I've been a banker 26 years and was a physician by training before that. And I did go to Hopkins class of 93. So quite a while ago. I think there was only one quad, maybe. I do have some slides. I won't necessarily go through all of them, but sometimes there's a good visual here and there. I don't know if somebody was going to put those up or not. Well, there we go. Okay. So I think, as Chau said, I spend most of my time in the later parts of a biotech company's cycle, relatively speaking. I am not an investor. I'm more of a facilitator. So when you do your series or your seed, series A, B, C, all the way to IPO, that's where we usually get involved, is in your pre-IPO round and your IPO financing to get public. The other pathway is M&A. You can sell as a company privately or go public and then sell. But at some point, there is a life cycle here for a biotech unless you plan on becoming Amgen or Gilead. There are certainly companies that are on their way there now that we historically haven't seen, like Alnylam is a $55 billion company, and argenx is a $40 billion company. So there are definitely companies that have become too big to acquire that have become mature biotech companies. For the rest of the companies, and there are 509 of them that are between 50 and 50 billion. They usually get acquired or merge or go away if they fail. Or in some cases, Chau mentioned Tourmaline, their asset sold for cardiovascular indications. It originally was a thyroid eye disease company. So there is a pivot in some of these companies. So where we come in is, I like to think ourselves in football as like the kicker, just to use the analogy. The VCs and the angel investors take you down the field to the 20-yard line, and then we get to kick the ball for a field goal, and you get a pat on the back, and if you make it, and if you miss it, everyone blames you. So it's very much like we got to just get it done. It's assumed you're going to get an IPO done or sell a company. So in today's market, broadly, as many of you seen on CNBC or Wall Street Journal, the S&P is trading at all-time highs, and yet healthcare is not. In particular, life sciences is trading flat at best, slightly up. Most of that is due to just regulatory uncertainty, and in particular, IRA and MFN are the big policy issues that are creating a big overhang on large cap pharma. And the reason large cap pharma is important is because they are the buyers of assets. Ultimately, as I said, unless you want to turn it into Amgen, large cap pharma is where you end up. Whether you get acquired by somebody mid-cap and then that mid-cap gets acquired, like in the case of Horizon Therapeutics, or you get acquired early on, like Tourmaline by Novartis. So it's very important to know how they're thinking about the world. And they are very much uncertain about what the regulatory and just overall pricing environment looks like. So if you look at, I don't know who's doing the slides, but this is the gap that I was talking about. The three lines at the bottom are the NASDAQ biotech, and then the pharma, and the top line is the S&P. So it is definitely gapped out, and that probably won't close unless there's more M&A, and M&A will more likely happen when there's more certainty in the regulatory side. So just as an example, Merck buys Verona, as Chau had mentioned earlier, $10 billion transaction. We worked on that with Merck. They gave zero value to ex-US and had to make the numbers work. So they attributed $10 billion of value to only the US and convinced themselves that it was worth $10 billion in the US in order for that transaction to happen. This is basically saying Europe is upside, or that there's complete uncertainty about whether they even want to launch in Europe because of MFN overhang. If you look at the next slide, this is probably more important from a next steps for most of the companies in this room and for early stage investors is how do you finance? And the left side of the page is quarterly financings for follow-ons, and you can see the last 3 quarters, or for 2025, it's been down relative to previous years. On the right side of the page, the vertical waterfall page here, these are IPOs. The ones that are performing positively are on the facing right, and most of them are more on the negative side. So the IPO market has not been great in the last year and a half. Very hard to see, but in the lower right corner, the number of IPOs, I think it's a typo, but there were 74 IPOs in 2021 in biotech. This year there were 5 if you include LB. And LB was a $52 million pre-money valuation when it went public. So why is all of this happening? There's no one answer, but some of the leading indicators that we look at, if you look at the next page here, this is just positive versus negative news. The middle bar is 50%, middle line is 50%. We haven't had great news in the first and second quarter of 25. Those are on the right side of the page, but in the third quarter, it's been very positive, a lot of positive news. Last time that happened was in late 21, early 22, and you'll see it correlates to the financings the lack of financings back then on the previous page as well. So I think positive news flow they create catalysts for people to finance off of in the public markets. And when you finance, what you're doing is bringing more money into the public markets. On the next page here, this is it's a histogram of the biotech universe. And this is why it's hard to take a biotech company public right now. The light blue bars are companies that are trading below 500 million in value. So if you are a public investor and you can buy an IPO, which is typically, call it 300 million in pre-money, and you want to raise 150 million, that's about $450 million, and then it has to trade up. So your indifference point is those blue bars. So a lot of the public investors are saying, I can go find the diamond in the rough among those 319 public companies that are as good or better than a new company where I don't know the management team, there's no research written on it, and there's no trading. So I'm going to go buy in the public markets because there's things that are cheap there, or I can find those diamonds in the rough. So I think until the market improves, IPOs are going to be more difficult to get done. That said, I don't want to be all doom and gloom. We are probably going to launch a real IPO, not a $50 million pre-money IPO, in the next couple of weeks, and it'll be the proverbial canary in the coal mine to see how the markets perform. We think we're not taking it out just to test it. We do think it's going to go well based on investors asking for it to be public. So we are hoping that it trades well once it goes public. So that'll be probably in early October when we launch that thing. And then we have another, and that's in the CNS space. We have another one after that in late October that's going to be in inflammation and immunology. I don't know about the other banks, but usually we do open the market. And so we're really hoping those go well for the sake of all of you. So that's kind of the financing market. I think what's important about, as I said, cash coming into the market, it depends on getting new money in from generalists, because the specialists have always been there and they trade in and out, but the generalists generally have 10, 20x the amount of capital as the healthcare specialists. And what takes them coming into the market is M&A. When they see M&A or when money is injected by the large caps into the system, what ends up happening is healthcare becomes a greater percentage of any given index. So if you're in the S&P and healthcare represents 9% of the S&P, Pfizer goes and buys a company or Merck buys a company, and now healthcare trades up and it's now 11%. Every portfolio manager has to match that 11%. So they take their $200 billion large cap, mid cap portfolio and say, I have to now put more money into healthcare. And that's how money flows into the sector. So we are always looking at healthcare capital inflow and outflow. And the only real extraneous event other than funds trading back and forth with each other is large cap pharma coming in, which then drives the generalists coming in. And I do think that companies like Alnylam, argenx, soon to be Insmed, which is now getting close to 30 billion. Those are the type of companies that generalists look at and say, this is the profile of company I like to see. And so we do think that there is going to be money coming in. Maybe I'll skip a couple of pages and just go to M&A so I don't take up all the time here. All right, this is pretty interesting. So the far left is the market cap of the entire biotech sector. 507? I think it's 607 companies, 50 million to 40 billion. And if you add them all up by market cap, it's 1 trillion. 1 trillion is only a third of, if you add up the 14 large pharma companies, Lilly being the red at the top. So the entire biotech sector is a third of pharma. And then if you add up all the pharmas together, it equals Apple. So this is mind-blowing in a sense that if you're a generalist and you own 5% of Apple, you could pretty much own every company in every sector in a meaningful way in our sector. So it's very important for the generalists to come in and really reinvigorate the sector. They usually do it with M&A, as I said. The other thing, the reasons they do it is if there's something thematic that they can understand. So they don't want to understand p-values, clinical trials, waterfall charts. They don't want to know any of that. They want to know profitability, size of market. Is this a $5 billion drug or a $500 million drug? Can this be an oral small molecule to serve the masses? Those are those are the big picture items they care about, and then they step foot into the sector and it drives the entire sector up. Just to give a sense, as I said, you can compare this to Apple, but on the next page here, Lilly is in red and the Mag 7 are in the other areas. And you can tell here the bottom three, by any metric, whether it's PE, growth, or profitability, Lilly goes toe-to-toe with any other company out there. The top two is just a matter of scale. It's the smallest one among there. It is in the top 15, but compared to like the Amazon, Googles of the world, it's tiny. So the sector is bound for consolidation. And that consolidation is not just pharma, but it's biotech into pharma. So pharma needs to buy biotech to maintain that growth, because our sector is unique in a sense that there's patents and that go away, so your drugs go away, so you're always needing to recycle. It's not like you have a search engine that expires and then 20 of them come in and all of a sudden you're 5% of the market. So our sector is unique in the sense that pharma needs biotech at all times. Just moving forward here, well, this is just showing that growth drives PE. This is not as relevant, but this is too hard to read on on a slide. But the four circled names on here are the companies, the larger companies that were acquired in 2025. They are all either on the market or, in the case of the one that's in that blue bar there, about to be on the market. Actually, SpringWorks, I was told, has a product on the market already. That was just a new indication. But what you see here is that from an M&A perspective, typically you get acquired where you see all the logos to the left of the blue bar. And those are companies based on how many years from market you are. So many companies do get acquired historically pre-2025 in the phase 2, early phase 3 region when you're 2 or 3 years away from approval. Because that's when pharma can influence your drug development so that they can have the broadest label possible. You have to remember that even though we all care about clinical development, they care about target product profile. They're the guys holding the hot potato at the end of the day that has to sell the drug. So you see most of the deals happening either before approval or way after approval, once a drug's on the market and they know it's doing well. Just moving on to the next page. We'll skip this so you guys can have these slides later. I'll end with this just since I've been rambling here. The left side here, bar charts, this is M&A. 2025 is the last bar in that left chart. Much lower this year, partly because of MFN, as I mentioned earlier. If you take 2024 and take out Seattle Genetics, that bar does come down, but 2025 has been a lot lower. That can't continue because pharma needs biotech for growth. So what has been part of the driver, and it'll be a conversation for the rest of the group here as well, a lot of it is those companies where I said all the logos were bunched up to the left of that blue line on the previous page, that's being replaced by China. So China, especially in oncology and inflammation and immunology, anything that's more protein engineering where you can take a existing target and make it better and make 20 of them, that's all coming from China. So the right side are the number of licensing deals that have happened year by year, and you can see it's skyrocketed. Anyone that has talked to Chinese companies know that they have very full pipelines. They can move very quickly. The PD-1 VEGF market, which started with Summit, is now 19 of them. And the large cap pharmas are looking to in-license the the latest stage ones with clinical data. So from an M&A perspective, I think the issue we're grappling with is if you are a US company in phase 2 or earlier or slightly later, and you're in that, where all those logos were on the left side of the page, you're competing against China. So how do you manage that in a world like today where this is not going to go away? So that's all kind of an overview. I tried to sound positive.
Yeah, no, so we all huddled before, and we were going to try to be as positive as possible. So I think that's a good start. We're going to do better on that front. But I mean, the facts are the facts. I mean, that does really set the stage, I think, for where we are. Rishi, did you want to try to tie that into the early stage mindset as you look at new deals? And also maybe introduce yourself too. I thought there were bios in the book, but I think.
Sure. Hi, everybody. Rishi Gupta, partner with OrbiMed, based in the Bay Area. Been at the firm over 20 years. I don't have a Hopkins connection, but I am on the board of Victor's company that he spoke about this morning, Delphi. And years ago, spent a lot of time in Gaithersburg because we were investors in Supernus Pharmaceuticals, which is still an independent company in the area, and Cogenesis, which was bought by Teva a long time ago. Look, one I guess piece of context that I think about is that, and many of us have been doing this long enough, that we lived through the financial crisis, and at that time it was also a very, very challenging period. It's, in my opinion, even more challenging than today, because our ecosystem was just smaller. The funding ecosystem for biotech was like way smaller than it is today. You could probably count on two hands like the number of sort of credible investment firms out there. And so it was very, very hard for companies to raise money. The anecdote that I tell, that I've told before, that I think about is back in 2009, we had invested in a company that had a fast follower prostate cancer drug. It was behind a company called Medivation, which was ultimately bought by Pfizer for a lot of money. This drug was IND stage. The mechanism was de-risked, right? It's something that, I know people can debate what that would be worth today, but we invested in the Series A round at a $3 million pre-money, which is sort of laughable now, right? But it was because literally nobody was investing in biopharma. So I think the good news is the ecosystem is much broader today. There are a lot more funding sources. We're seeing companies where fundraising is a slog, but companies that have good technology, good teams, a good path to getting to the next milestones, they're getting it done, right? It's a struggle, no question. It takes time, but they're getting it done. And I think to me that's like a big difference from past challenging periods.
Yeah, no, that's a terrific point. I mean, there are many $500 million or bigger funds, much more today than there were 15 years ago, 25 years ago, and deals are being done. I mean, we see that every day. And maybe for the next question, let me turn to you, Sara, and ask you about how you think about the landscape, also these very large Series A rounds that are being done, and then there are companies that can't raise $5 million. There's a big disconnect there. We see that a lot, and I bet some of you in the room are wondering how did that company raise $100 million and I can't even get $1 million or $5 million. So tell us about Innovate. I think folks don't know about your firm, and then maybe address that.
Yeah. So I've been in venture almost 17 years. Actually was at Yale with both of these folks, and they were talking about going to OrbiMed, and I was like, I got to finish my thesis. I don't have time to learn about venture. And then a few years later, ended up in venture. So I was at New Enterprise Associates for about 12 years. Then went to a hedge fund called Avoro, helped launch a venture fund, and then went to a fund called Innovate Sciences, which is a $600 million fund structured as a portfolio company of a private equity shop that's healthcare focused called Patient Square Capital. So we invest across therapeutics, kind of late preclinical through mid-clinical. So in terms of these mega rounds, of which there's been really enormous number of mega rounds, it has come down a bit in 2024. 24 and so far in 25. But I think some of that is driven by the focus more on big chronic diseases and really large market opportunities, as well as the sort of paltry IPO market that we've had, because the syndicates are needing to raise enough capital to take these companies to some meaningful inflection point, which is usually clinical proof of concept if possible. So more capital around these concepts. If you're going after big chronic diseases, you're going to need to raise more capital to get through, say, a phase 2 proof of concept. And part of the reason that there's more focus on big chronic diseases versus, when I started in venture, where a lot of it was targeted oncology, smaller indications, rare diseases, partly because there is more funding available, and also because pharma is now really interested in, say, $2 billion or more. They want to plug big holes in their revenues pipeline. So it's hard to get them interested in things that are, even $1 billion or less versus, maybe a decade ago. And we also have a lot of innovation, whether it's GLP-1s or all these bispecific new targets in I&I. We also have people finally recognizing that if you make things more convenient for patients so that they only need to get an injection, once a month or once every 3 months, that's actually meaningful to clinicians and to patients. So we see a lot of innovation that's maybe people turn their nose up at in a decade or so ago, but is now driving real market value. So I think part of it is a flight to quality in a way, or a sense of being a little nervous, wanting to have that syndicate around. So sometimes there's that inflection point where a company gets a really credible lead, and then suddenly they're oversubscribed. And I think there's also a dynamic where in this market, whereas maybe 8-10 years ago, if someone came and said, I'm raising a 50 million B round, it sounded okay. But now that sounds small. So what are you going to do with 50 million? How far is that going to take you? So there is a bit of a dichotomy and a bit of the haves and have-nots, where you can either get a lot of capital together around a really interesting big market opportunity, great team, or some of the players that might have gotten funding for smaller rounds, 5-7 years ago, are struggling a bit.
Have you done any preclinical investments lately? And sort of how did you come to that investment?
Yeah.
And I'm sure you're inundated with a lot of earlier stage opportunities.
Yeah, so one I can point to, actually, invested with Mitra over there, a company called Normunity, which has a T-cell engager program on a novel tumor-associated target. So we, as preclinical when we invested, it's rapidly moving into the clinic now. But some things about that story that made it interesting is, a great team, but also a very clear thesis of this is a really novel target. No one else has gone after it. It's really well suited for a T-cell engager platform. It's present on big tumor opportunities, so big market opportunities are available. And also the T-cell engager class, we were quite interested in it, whether masked or unmasking, a lot of innovation there, seeing more data in the solid tumor space, and that data is starting to come out, but still pretty much at the leading edge of the T-cell engager space, whereas we spent a lot of time in 24 looking at radioligand therapies, didn't end up finding anything we wanted to invest in, sort of felt like we missed the boat a bit. So sometimes you're taking a little bit more risk to get out in front of something that seems like it could really hit and be, an interesting modality. But I do think a lot of, in this market, you have to have a very clear thesis. This amount of capital, it's going to take me to this. This is going to be meaningful to the market. This is the benchmark we're going to try to beat. These are the tumor settings, and boom, 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 line it up, and hopefully you have a good, valuation. A lot of people being forced to, have a lower valuation than in the past, and then it's an interesting thesis.
Can I jump in on the mega round thing? So,
Sure.
I hate those as an investor, and I'll tell you why. So I think, when you're talking about companies raising $400 or $500 billion, even, you'll see, right, we've seen some of those A rounds. You're, as an investor, you're playing for a multi-billion-dollar outcome, right? That's how you get sort of venture-like returns in that setting. And you look at our space, and there's only so many of those, right? There's the odds of any one company achieving that are just not great. So the numbers are not in your favor. And I think, even though there were some really good things that came out of the boom we had a few years ago in biotech. I mean, I think we may talk about it later, but you had, a bunch of new modalities really start to mature and become products like cell therapy and gene therapy that probably wouldn't have happened without that inflow of capital into our space. I think one of the downsides is that as an industry, we lost sight of capital efficiency. Little biotechs have always been, scrappy, kind of get to the next milestone, raise money to the next, and that model has worked. It's worked for, employees, entrepreneurs. It's worked for investors. And I am personally not a fan of that dynamic that has, funds have gotten bigger. Frankly, we're guilty of it too, but it's made that, I think, much more challenging.
I like that comment. It's positive for the audience here. You don't have to raise $100 million.
That's right.
So let me turn to Faye. So you represent. You're the representative of corporate venture here, so I think in a way we'd love to hear about your company, German private pharma company, a little bit of a different flavor, and also maybe tell us about your long-term view as a strategic investor and how you think about platforms. I know a number of companies today talked about really exciting platforms which are slightly out of favor for other VCs.
So my name is Shen, and I'm heading the U.S. practice for the Boehringer Ingelheim Venture Fund. And earlier, when Albert showing all the farmers, and we're not there, and people probably wonder why, we are still large capital farmer, but we're privately owned. We're the only privately owned farmer today, and it's only owned by 7 shareholders in Boehringer family. So we are not opening our door to anybody in the Wall Street. And we're still doing M&A, but we're usually keep a pretty low profile. We have been set up a fund 15 years ago. We're evergreen setup. So the Boehringer family gave us a pot of money, and we will continue invest from this pot of money, continue grow, and the proceeded return will come back into the fund and continue forward. We're the, I would say, company formation, seed lead fund. We will continue follow the investment we put in seed all the way until crossover. Usually I will tell the CEO, let me know next round is your crossover, and please dilute me out. I will not participate in IPO. The reason is we want to stay under 5% when the IPO SEC filing, because we do not want to consolidate and let people see our Boehringer family's booking. So that's kind of uniqueness for our venture fund setup. We always lead. We always take board seat. We are open to co-lead with other funds. We have been working with many funds here together. I think in this economy environment, it's very, very important for similar mindset investor to come together and with a similar vision and moving company forward. Rishi and I were talking about last night at dinner table about I also hate the large rounds. I feel investors sometimes, we are the one to blame in a way is we are always chasing the spotlight. We feel, what we learned from the last decade is financial risk is very scary. When the next round happens, if we cannot find more money, you're out to down round, and it's very punitive for people put money in previously for the founders. What's something we can de-risk is putting our money together and de-risk financial risks. That's something we can control. Science translation, we cannot control. People, team, eventually how dynamic play out, it's harder to control, but financial risk, we can control. Let's put our money together and also make something maybe meaningful to that. But by being the farmer end, I will say we see a lot of M&A coming, right? Certainly we will have Capstone, this kind of company, in those things, few patients, sell for very large, everybody get huge return. But it's limited, to be honest. I think most farmers either buy early or buy very late. So immediately I can plug into my marketing engine and making sales. Or I take a risk early. I use my wise eye. We have a lot of BD folks in each organization, and they use their wise eyes and look what's a gem and really internalize much early. I was in the IND vicinity, sometimes even before IND. sometimes have a few patient data, and really moving forward. That seems more and more obviously, I would say, in the recent years. That's what we see in the pharma end.
Yeah, no, that's very helpful. I mean,
So you asked me about the platform question.
Yes, oh yeah,
How can I answer?
sorry, continue.
So being a strategic venture fund, of course, we don't want to lose money as any venture fund colleagues, but our foremost important mission is curve innovation that pharma today cannot do, and really incubate this innovation in like the university setting like here, and moving forward into patients that can make a difference. So that's really our mission, and we are evergreen setup. We don't have a close end. We can continue follow our mission and continue, we're patient, moving things forward. However, everything is, for platform, we cannot have a company have a golden hammer looking for nails. That's very tough for us, because pharma ultimately we're selling drugs. So you need to tell me what your lead indication is. You have a great platform, can do everything, but we cannot really incubate a CRO model either. So you need to tell me what your great hammer eventually can find that nail perfectly fitting your hammer to make a really great difference impact.
That's terrific advice. I mean, I think if you have a platform, come up with a program, and to the best of your ability, map out what that path is to get to the clinic, right? That will get you the most traction with investors.
Definitely,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Could you talk about one of your preclinical deals that you've done recently, and also maybe explain sort of how did it take a long time? Did you work with the founders to kind of get to a yes vote eventually to invest?
So the most recent deal we did was last year. We closed the end of November. That does take a lot longer for syndicate. In the 2020, 2021 phase, I think everybody will agree with me. Usually 3 months oversubscribed, and then we're done.
3 months, 30 seconds.
Yeah. Oh, okay. Well, you're much better than me. But I think that one especially was a cell gene therapy. I think I heard a lot. Early gene cell therapy, we don't even look. So it was taking much longer. But I think there's still enough fund, like Blackbird here and their Heather's colleague Epiderics. We work with all these funds. I think as long as the asset we feel there is differentiating enough, transformative enough, we're willing to put money together to moving forward.
So that was actually my next question about cell and gene therapy, which I know a lot of academic folks working on cell and gene therapies. That's where a lot of the innovations come from. We had a wave of a lot of great investment, a few exits, and then we have, unfortunately last week, one patient died in the Capsida trial. We've had toxicity with the AAV. Maybe I'm going to ask Albert first, from the public market side of things, those stocks have gotten crushed. What's your sense of, interest in cell and gene therapy? What will it take to turn the tide there? And then I'm going to go to the private investors and get their take on it.
Yeah, certainly the 2020, 2021 time period, a lot of those companies went public, and cash was just flowing to invest. It then spurred the derivative market, which is like the guys that manufacture. So, National Resilience, Elevate Bio, some of those types of companies. I think by the time you get to today, or even, frankly, over the last 2 or 3 years, that has largely gone away. Frankly, CAR T, TCRs, and all of the gene therapies with Lenti especially have gone out of favor, and people look at that as an interesting way to show that science works, but let's find a cheaper way to actually have something practical. So what we found in the public markets is that unless you're on the market or have gotten approved and are getting onto market, you're really going to be in the gutter for a long time. So it's very much a big inflection point once you get approved and you have a real drug. We saw that case study with Sarepta. I mean, that's AAV, but at one point that was a $12 billion company when they had phase 3 data and had just gotten approved. It's now a $3 billion company. You look at Legend, which is a CAR T for multiple myeloma. It's almost curative. I think the median overall survival is like 5 years or something like that. That is a stock that seems to be range bound because there's nobody that wants to buy it. It's partnered with J&J. And there's just going to be a finite market depending on how much they can manufacture. So it is very much a business that's hard to scale, which is why the simple answer is gravitate to small molecules or the convenience, as Sara said, if you can do once every 3 months, that's what people are looking for. If you have something as cumbersome as cell therapy, it's going to be very difficult to make a business out of it. So that is the typical, looks like a good science project, but not necessarily a good business. So the real question is, how do you turn it around, or what changes that? Because it is very good science. And I think where the market has gravitated towards is just in vivo CAR T as one method. The second is cell and gene therapy as proof of concept, but then going after siRNA or other modalities to be a replacement for cell therapy. So that's almost like your science experiment to get other therapies there. But it does have to be more about lower cost and less CapEx and just less cumbersome as a therapy in the public market.
Sara and Rishi, I'd love to hear what you guys are thinking about cell and gene therapy.
Yeah, I mean, we have a higher bar for cell and gene therapy. I think on the gene therapy side, I've invested in the past in back of the eye gene therapy, and that I think is a place where it does make sense because it's less, you need less material, it's somewhat immune privileged and so forth. Or say ear, we also had a gene therapy ear company at NEA. So we still look at opportunities, but outside of say in vivo CAR T, it's tougher. I think a lot of maybe 5, 7, 8 years ago, we probably did ourselves a disservice by talking up so much the CAR Ts, the gene editing, gene therapies. Definitely great science, but it sort of has in the broader public eye, anybody who's following it from like this distance, not super close, would say those things haven't really played out, and there haven't been that many approvals, and now the stocks are down. But it does obscure the fact that we have bispecifics, T-cell engagers, RNA-based therapies, in vivo CAR T is coming up. So there are a lot of ways that we're using that science to make drugs that will be cheaper, easier to get to patients. A lot of patients don't yet want to modify their genome, permanently, or so I think there are ways to get at the science, but it's a learning process anytime you have a new modality as to whether or not it's going to be acceptable to the market.
Yeah. I mean, I guess the first thing I'd say is we do have some amazing products, right, that are making huge
Especially
difference
like
for patients. You look at
tumor,
Zolgensma, you look at the multiple myeloma CAR T, you mentioned that, and that's fantastic for society, and I think that's at some level why everybody in this room does what we do, right, is to get to those kinds of outcomes for patients. I do think, to me, gene therapy and cell therapy may be a little different. So gene therapy, I think what we're kind of realizing as a field and as a community is we just don't actually, like AAV gene therapy, I'm speaking of here, really understand what drives some of the safety issues that we're seeing. And I actually think academia has a role to play in helping to really kind of drive the scientific understanding there, whether it's we got to select patients better, or there's some immune response that we don't sort of fully have our heads wrapped around that's happening that could be driving some of these AEs. But I think to the extent, as we get better about reducing that risk, I think that's going to open up more opportunities for more interest from investors, more opportunities to develop more interesting products there. CAR T, I agree with some of the comments. I think anybody working in that space now, you have to think about why does this have to be done as a CAR T as opposed to some of the other, right, bispecific or RNAi. And if there is some interesting angle there, I think you need to move pretty quickly to allogeneic or in vivo, or right, like I think autologous, again, we have some good products that are out there, but they're, I think, just tougher businesses, and they're not the kinds of margins that big pharma is used to. And so I think that just becomes a tougher sell.
Anything fair?
Yeah, so for me, for us, for investment, it's really biology novelty. We're still quite modality agnostic, I will say. If gene therapy can solve a problem, small molecule, large molecule, bispecific cannot solve, we're happy to invest in such modality. So I will say we're still pretty risk tolerant for such therapy. And another thing I want to say, okay, right now, public, I totally agree, cell gene therapy is scary. But 10 years ago, when BI Venture Fund investing at the time ADC company, people say, you guys must be crazy. The first ADCs all failed. The linker not stable. It's a dead valley for you guys going to. We still invest in that because we're company formation, see the lead. It's not 3 years. It's not like dosing patient right way for every single company, right? Especially for novel modality. And there happened to be our company dosed a patient, got good data at the bull time. So it's sold for very high for payment. So I feel like, especially doing early investment, people like us, we really could not chase the spotlight. We have to really work hard, and the spotlight, I believe, will come to you.
So I've been staring at this China slide for the last few minutes. I'd like to turn back to that topic because it is a really important one, I think, for our industry, as an existential question of how do we maintain the advantage that we have of the biotech industry in a global setting. China is, really coming up with many new novel molecules. If you read the news, it seems like this happened overnight, but actually it's been about 20 years in the making. It's an incredibly thoughtful process that I think China has made and put into this development. But now we're seeing the output of all that. So I guess my question for the investors, and maybe as you try to tie it into this earlier stage audience, what considerations should entrepreneurs have, as they start their journey in the context of a very different competitive environment than we've ever had? You create one novel sort of concept here, publish it, and next thing you know, there are 10 molecules in China or more. What do you do in that setting? And we're trying to be positive.
Yeah. Look, happy to start. So I think it's another source of competition, no question, and it's, as you said, a formidable source of competition. I think it's just important, right? It's always important to be aware of the competitive environment that you're operating in, and I think for entrepreneurs who are, out, looking to raise money, et cetera, you just got to inform yourself as best you can, understand who else is out there doing similar things, why you might be better. You're going to get asked about that from investors, and so having as good an understanding as you can is important. I think to what you were getting at, Chau, with things that are really based on novel biology, one thing many of our companies are now doing is honestly staying under the radar longer than they would have in years past. No publications. Delay your patent filing as long as you possibly can, because it publishes 18 months after filing. And until you feel confident enough in your kind of leading position to be able to sort of come out of stealth and disclose, because once you are out, it used to be the case when I started in this business. If something started to look interesting, you might find like 3 or 4 followers out there. Now, you turn around and there's like a couple dozen, and a good number of those are from China. And so, it's another function of all the capital that's come into our space, right? There's positives around that, but there's also challenges that come out of that.
Well, it's a bit of a tricky balance, especially to an academic audience, where publishing is so important to your advancement. But Sara, what's your advice to folks?
Yeah, I agree with, unfortunately, you have to stay under the radar. Don't disclose your target if it's something that is that's not already out there. And then, interestingly, a lot of the Chinese farms, they don't have their pipelines on their websites. Mm-hmm. You have to get relationships, figure out, ask around, ask people who know. There are people out BD folks that are shopping a lot of these assets, that's the only way you're going to know what is really the competitive landscape. And if you can do that, then it also helps when you're going out to investors to say, look, no, we've talked to this person, they're in the know, they haven't seen any others of these, talked to this person. So there's a bit of that. And we also are seeing a lot of innovation of new companies being formed around assets from China. So it's not just pharmas going out and buying stuff and competing with all our US companies. There's maybe half a dozen things just seen in the last few months. It's kind of a Me Too asset. It has some clinical data. Doesn't seem differentiated, but it's a big market opportunity, and somebody's raising a ton of capital around it to take it into US trials. And I think we are getting more confidence over time in the clinical data from China, the summit data, it's still being weighed out, but so you may have those opportunities to bring things in from China as well. Upfronts are higher. It's, asking for more equity. One thing I would be cautious about that we just learned about recently is this new rule that went into effect in July around bulk transfer of sensitive data to, covered persons, countries of concern. So you can actually, as a director, have criminal liability up to 25 years in federal prison if you are found to have enabled the access of a covered person or country of interest to samples from which you could potentially derive, 100 samples of genomic data. So it doesn't even need to have been generated, and they don't need to have gotten access. It just needs to be deemed that they had the ability to get access. So very vague, just went into effect, scared us away from several Cayman-based companies. But that can also come into play if you have licensed something in from a Chinese company and there's a joint steering committee. You have to be really careful to be thoughtful around that, CRO relationships. And the New York Times recently reported this executive order. It doesn't necessarily seem like it's coming through, but that's another concern around trying to damp down the acquisitions and licensing.
We're actually running down on time. So there are some questions. I saw hands in the back. We'd love to talk to you.
Yeah, I just had a quick question. So for the Chinese assets, are those mostly small molecule? Would you imagine the gene therapy is a little bit less,
A lot of antibodies.
or antibody,
Yeah, I think
proteins?
it's
Small molecules and antibodies.
I think it's across the board.
It's across the board.
Yeah, across the board.
Well,
And in fact, in cell and gene therapy, the regulatory hurdles for early stage trials are actually easier in China. So it's even yet another layer of competitive threat.
But most of the licensing that's coming into the U.S. into pharma is large molecule antibodies. And I think small molecule, there's a lot of IP issues. So you'll see, especially in oral GLP-1s, there's a lot of, I owe Pfizer a royalty, or this infringes on this patent, or these two companies are in litigation. And so the small molecule market is a lot harder for the U.S. companies to get comfortable bringing in large molecule or antibodies, and bispecifics and trispecifics tend to be more common. And there is one last thing. There is a benefit in the U.S. where if you can get U.S. clinical data, that tends to be worth 10x of whatever data is in China. So, the PD-1 VEGF in licensing of 3S Pharma by Pfizer, they had 600
Morgan Stanley
patients.
did that.
Yeah, we worked on that transaction. They had 600 patients of data in China. If you probably had 100 or 50 patients of data in the U.S., it would have been licensed in the same conversation.
Yeah, I actually have 3 questions, but please pick whichever question is interesting. So I like the slide with the Lilly because it sort of brings back this question of sort of the mega blockbuster model. So you're seeing, Lilly's tirzepatide, which may hit $50 billion in the near future. Keytruda, $30 billion, Dupixent, $15 billion, J&J's Darzalex, $15 billion. So I'm just curious about, do you see that as a potential trend, or am I overinterpreting that? And what trickle-down effects does that have for sort of VC investing in biotech in general? That's one question. The second question is, you're seeing a lot of press and investor interest around sort of AI-enabled drug discovery, as well as aging/longevity/cellular rejuvenation. So I was just curious about the panel's thoughts on that. And the third question is really, what is most exciting to you in terms of spaces or areas to watch over the next couple of years?
We should trade seats. That's terrific. Those are really good questions. I mean,
I'll start with the size of the drug that's needed. Sara said it earlier, they won't even look at it if you're less than 2 billion in peak sales, and that's just a minimum now. So it used to be 1 billion, as she said. Now it's 2, and it's because Keytruda will lose 28 billion in 2028, and they need to fill that with a lot of other products. So they are looking larger. The companies are getting larger, so they need larger amounts to even increase 1 percentage point. So I think, maybe from the early stage investor and where you could move the needle is don't go after the smaller indication that's high probability of success. Because I think the model used to be, or maybe it still is in venture, like go after the higher probability of success, smaller market, and that's like your test case for something that's maybe one phase of development behind that's in a giant population for, quote, upside value. I think they're really looking at upside value only. The mid caps, like Servier, Ipsen, kind of some of the European mid caps, they're okay with the smaller market sizes because they're smaller generally, and they're okay with I'll buy the upside because they know that they're not going to get blown out of the water by Merck. Like if Merck wants to buy an oncology company versus an Ipsen, Merck's going to win every time. Or so like GSK bought IDRX in the beginning of the year. That's because GSK is at the bottom of this list here, and they are considered like a smaller pharma company, and they have to go after the sub $2 billion peak sales drugs. So it is worth it to go after the much larger.
And IRA too, especially for small molecules, makes it.
Yeah, that's a whole nother can of worms. Small molecule IRA is a 9-year life. So in order for a large cap pharma to maximize and get the full NPV of its investment, it has to launch really well and has to launch large. So you can't go after the small indication because your 9-year clock starts. If 3 years later you get hypertension instead of some really small, rare, high blood pressure, you now have 6 years to launch hypertension. So in those situations, the farmers are thinking, maybe I'll even do that trial, but then hold back on launching the drug until I get hypertension, large market hypertension. Mm-hmm. So IRA is a big contributor to that.
I'll offer an answer to your second question, my view really quick. Longevity, I just don't think the science is there yet. From my standpoint, I'm interested, like if you guys do any of that, Faye, but my view on the AI side, a few years ago, we saw this whole class of AI for drug discovery companies. I'd say as a whole, probably have underwhelmed in terms of what's come out of them to date anyway. There have been some, but that technology is having some impact. And if you, like, at least across our portfolio now, almost every company is using different AI tools in different ways, right? So now I think we've sort of gone from this is an AI drug discovery company to it's another sort of tool that kind of everybody's going to use in different ways depending on exactly what their needs are and what they're doing. And I think it'll be useful, right? And it'll continue to become useful. Our view is the value is still in the drugs at the end of the day. It's sort of, and I think there'll be some successes, but it'll be hard to build AI sort of tools companies that become really large, in my opinion.
Yeah, so I can touch on the anti-aging topic.
Yeah.
So I think quite a lot of VC, CVC, corporate venture fund, we are all discussing this topic quite seriously, actually. So this fall into not the proximity investment like a lot of CVC we do to fuel our future pipeline. These called our seismic shift. We do know if we got it, it's very large. But the important part is you need to dissect it down. What does that really mean? How you do the trial? Anti-aging, I cannot do a forever, people live forever trial, right? So we actually spend quite a number of years, dive deeper into this area, and we decide we want to regenerate T-cell repertoire. And we feel that feel into the next generation of immuno-oncology and immunology, both. Because we do know that starting from teenage, our thymus start to involute. And because this evolution happened, we do see a logarithm, the declining of T cell repertoire diversity coming out. And we feel this is really the future. So we actually heavily looking into under every single stone to how to regenerating a concept able to having diverse T cell repertoire in older patient population. Lilly colleagues recently reached out to me. We have very deep discussion. They are looking into that area too. So I think this is probably a worthwhile betting for the CVCs. We like you said earlier, we have long commitment. We are willing to invest at such thing. So globally, we have 3 companies in incubation for regenerating T cell repertoire in an older patient population.
Great. Any other questions? So maybe in closing, I think we're almost out of time, right? Yeah, so I'm going to just go down the row and let each of you finish with a closing thought, something on your mind that you haven't said today, a bit of advice for the audience, and keep it positive.
So as I said early on, I've been at this a long time, and part of the results of having done this a long time is there are 6 and hopefully soon to be 7 drugs on the market that have come out of companies that I've invested in. And that's incredibly gratifying. And I know, again, that's a big part of why people in this room do what they do. Kind of keep that front and center, right? The patients at the end of the day as you go forward. And it's incredibly motivating. And I think, especially in challenging times, right, to kind of keep coming back to why we do what we do.
Yeah, and I would say when you're pitching, don't go for shock and awe. Go for simplicity, comprehension, recall, clarity. Make sure that whatever you want to tell that investor at the end, they have a few bullet points, and it's enough to get them to the next call. It doesn't need to be everything that you could tell them. So that's what I see with a lot of companies that have great science, very academically minded folks. They overestimate how much VCs know or can pay attention to with their phone there, and there's sort of ADHD, and they just try to tell you everything at once, and then you leave going, that was interesting, but I'm going to have to go back through that deck and spend a little more time on it to really, and then that never happens. It's just, it's what we used to say would just be on the desk, but no one even prints things out anymore, so it's just somewhere in the ether and doesn't make it to the next thing. So just be clear, less is more, bring them back for the next call.
I would say that I've been in this business a long time as well. One of the first IPOs I worked on was Alnylam. It was at $6.50 a share, and the price on the range on the cover was $12 to $14. And I think we raised $35 million on the IPO. And when I look at that company and compare it to all the other companies that have been successful, it's almost like your first asset is never the asset that ultimately succeeds. It's really the science and then the perseverance of the management team. So Alnylam is now, on this chart as a $50 billion company. Vertex, remember when they were a Hep C company before they were CF, and I think before that they were some kind of genomics company in 2001. Someone mentioned Medivation, which was an Alzheimer's company that sold as a prostate cancer company. So it's really about the science and the people that are there as much as the actual project itself. So I look at this as a business that perseveres, and if you can get the funding, something will come out of it.
So I actually think right now is the opportunity to start a new company if you have very innovative idea. I think because a lot of capital, we heard a lot of capital being put in the late stage, and yes, it's very sparse in the early stage, but what's left are the life science specialists. We're still looking under every stone for innovative idea. And guess what? In 3 years, what's the most valuable thing on the market? It will be the thing has development candidate, have good R&D. Yes, today probably is not inflection point, but I do think because our knowledge don't grow on tree, I cannot pull out development candidate out of my pocket. it have to incubate all the way until there. So I do think actually today is a great opportunity for all the great science emerging from academic and they're looking for the investor have the same mindset, have same vision with you, and moving that forward towards IND filing.
Yeah, every business has cycles. Biotech has had some down cycles over the last 30 years, and every single time we've come out of it stronger, better, and made more drugs and cured diseases, and I think we're going to do that this time as well. Thank you to the panelists for your wisdom. We appreciate it.